officials, thereby putting the onus very much on the EU to stay united at a moment when there is increased selective cooperation with Russia in the offing, it seems. But that's my little thought experiment. Perhaps you have another.
Thank you, Stephen. Perhaps let's go to the panel to discuss some of these interesting thought exercises. So, Pernilla, would you like to start?
Yeah, I don't think I should maybe answer the qualified majority voting.
That is a bit difficult, yeah.
Norway is not part of it. We are very glad to participate and contribute, but we cannot be part of the decision making. I agree with Katarina that the UK will probably be involved in PESCO, or at least in European defense cooperation in some way or the other after Brexit. But I'm not so sure about the institute, because there is a division now. You have something happening outside the EU framework, which is the European, the French European Intervention Initiative, and there the UK is already involved, and I think that they will be involved more and more, and we will see more and more of these initiatives, I think, within and outside. So the question if the UK will have some kind of participation in PESCO, I hope so, because this for Norway is also, this is important, because probably if UK gets some opportunity, there will be some kind of framework for third-party participation, which is not clarified yet. So we'll see. But for the moment, the EU is quite strict on not opening up for third countries at the moment. Yeah, and when it comes to multilateralism and bilateralism, I think I agree with you. I think that multilateralism will prevail over bilateralism, but we will see more flexibility and new alliances within the multilateral framework, if I understood your point correctly. I think I stop there and leave.
Anna, your ideas on multilateralism?
Yes, thank you. It's very welcome thought that all these new ideas and initiatives eventually coalescing into one. Eventually, also, they might just be forgotten. And I think that we have a number of these initiatives or new openings that are sort of half forgotten and that actually should be used. And one should sometimes also implement and show that there are things that are actually usable. Battle groups, for instance, before coming to new thoughts about still new ideas. And about this very intricate question about qualified majority voting and whether this group of countries could block decisions or have what kind of position they would have. Really interesting. I'm glad you brought this element of supranationalism up, because that is really something very important, but has been a bit divisive for this group of countries. And also, I think that where they might find common ground might not be the issues that are geographically near to them, but issues that are further away, or issues that are more of a value or sort of principle character in a sense. So this is a very good thought experiment, but I still have to think more about it.
Rina, could you comment on this?
Yeah, a couple of comments. First on QMV. I don't anticipate that this could happen. And in fact, we have this cool app it's a voting calculator, and I just put in the blocking minority of the Nordic-Baltic, and there's no way. You need a lot more. Well, you would need, I put in also UK, Poland, just for fun, Hungary. And it was still saying it was approved, and then I put in, just to see how many it would take, I put in Cyprus, Croatia, Bulgaria, and Belgium, just for the heck of it. And only then was it failed. Was it a failed proposal? So it's a great little app. It's free from the Council Secretariat. And you can literally calculate right away if it's going to work or not. So it's kind of an interesting experiment, but what it does show us is that as a bloc, this is not good enough. We have to, if the Nordic and Baltic governments decide to move ahead together, then they need more allies, and big ones, and also more of them. So that's my one point. The second thing I wanted to address was the UK issue. It's an open question for sure. It's two more issues, if I can.
Go ahead.
It's an open question right now whether what kind of a relationship there is going to be with the UK in the security and defence field after the Brexit. There is the thinking process right now is only at the seminar level, so there's a kind of a food chain in how these decisions will be made once the negotiations begin. And the bottom of the food chain is that there's a seminar that's organized, or a series of seminars actually, and 3 seminars have been organized already on this topic. And already just at the seminar level, it shows the results of the sort of the survey of the member states show that there are some, probably more numerous than the other ones, who are interested in a very close, very pithy security relationship with the UK. But there are some big important member states who are not that keen because they don't want to, they don't see any reason for making things a little happier for the UK once it leaves. So that's one argument. The other is why should the UK have any special setup that other third countries then can try to emulate? And when I say other third countries, what we're talking about here is Turkey. And so there are some concerns among some member states about that, and then further afield as well. So at this point, if you were to take the temperature in the room right now, then it's by no means a consensus position that the relationship with the UK should be as close as possible. It's not like that at the moment. The second point of interest simply is that things are heating up in the Brexit negotiations. We're certainly not to the point of discussing what the future relationship looks like, but there have been some remarks that have been made by Michel Barnier, our chief negotiator for the EU. And just last week, he said something about, he had press remarks after meeting with his counterparts about the security relationship, where he said the headlines were Barnier wants very close security relationship with the UK. But then if you read the fine print, the fine print says in the internal security field. So why do I raise attention to this? It's because Michel Barnier, among his various other illustrious positions in the background, he's done just about, as one newspaper said, just about every job in the French government. He's doing an excellent job as the Brexit negotiator. But just before that, he was President Juncker's special envoy for security and defense matters. Let's not forget that. So he knows a little bit about this. And just before that, he was the head of the working group for the European People's Party, the Conservative Party in the European Parliament, on this very issue. So he's no stranger to the issue area, and it's not something that will be pulled over his eyes. I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you very much. Margarita, would you want to make a point on this?
Majority voting is out of the agenda, so I'll try to comment not about the blocking majority, but probably how things might evolve and what Nordic-Baltic countries might have in common, what could be the uniting interests. So first of all, I believe that cooperation will be bilateral and multilateral. It's going to be based on the interest, and I think it's good, and nothing is put in stone, and it should not be put in stone because the security environment is changing. So we have to find the best working formats how to ensure our security. For example, our cooperation with Germany has been strengthened during the last years within the framework of NATO and enhanced forward presence. We are integrating our forces, defense forces, with the German defense forces. We're conducting more exercises. The biggest procurement that we had, defense procurement that we had in 25 years of independence was coming from Germany. But, for example, cooperation in the framework of PESCO is not very extensive. We are not we are not considering this framework nation concept. We still are quite skeptical about that. We are we're observing German PESCO projects, but, for example, Germany is not a part of our project on rapid cyber defense teams. So the good cooperative bilateral cooperation and cooperation within NATO is not transferring into the EU. And I don't think it's a bad thing in general. It's just different things that we're needing. If it's working, then it's working and it's okay. And it does not prevent to enhancing our cooperation with other countries. Thinking about the Nordic-Baltic, we have a long history of success stories, like Baltic Defense College, which is a very good project, which is led by 3 Baltic countries, but also supported a lot by the Nordic countries. And I think it's a very good example. There are other examples. We also had not so good stories like defense procurement projects that we wanted to implement, but it didn't work because the countries would choose different paths. But it doesn't prevent us from stepping forward and searching for the formats that work. And what could work within the European Union, within CSDP? I think that we have some interest in common. For example, we Nordic and Baltic countries value very much NATO-EU cooperation. Even Finland, which is not member of NATO, NATO is important, and this cooperation between 2 organizations is in the interest of all Nordic-Baltic countries. So we could see this as a platform to raise our interest and to cooperate and try to push forward initiatives related to that. Russia, I'm not very optimistic about our common position on Russia, because I think that although in general we have similar positions, but the strength of these positions varies depending on how close we are to Russia.
To Vilnius.
To Vilnius, yeah, to Vilnius. And last but not least, all these initiatives that have been emerging now, I think that we have to be more reflective on those initiatives, because now they are very politically constructed and we are just joining them to wave the flags, but don't think about the implementation of the projects that these initiatives entail. For example, take this French initiative and countries participating in these initiatives. France, Germany, Finland, what about their strategic cultures? What about their operational interoperability? What if there is a joint operation? I mean, will they be able to work together? And others as well. So I think that more reflection is necessary, but the problem is that the environment is changing, and being small countries, we are a bit scared about the consequences where this environment is leading us.
And we have another problem, time's running out.
Yep.
Actually, it just ran out. I wish the discussion was just starting, because I feel as if there are many unanswered questions that we will perhaps be able to go through during coffee with those of you who are not taking a flight from Tallinn. I know some of you are, so I can't allow this discussion to stretch further. I do understand that we have another little thing following up this panel here, but a round of applause for everyone. Thank you very much.
Now I would like to ask everyone to remain seated still for a while. We do a very short session of final conclusions. We just switch the people on the floor. I will ask Stephen and Kate now to come here together with Johannes. And we try to make some very brief concluding remarks based on the discussions. Yeah, you come to these three. And I think you will need microphones. Yes.
There is some in the hall. There was a roaming microphone. Yeah, maybe we can use that.
Whatever is easier. Okay, so we have time until 4 o'clock. We will not keep you any longer. Now it's my turn to chair, and I will be very strict with the time limits. But I will ask now the chairs who have done an excellent job today to work a bit more and to come up with very short, just 5 minutes, including some points on what, based on our discussions, what are the issues, interests where the Nordic-Baltic group can do things together in the EU framework, what are issues that they cannot do, maybe something important was missing from the debates, feel free to add that. But just some very short reflections on my own side. Quite a few people made comments on the title of the conference. I take full responsibility for the title, and I add my own hesitation, namely, having listened to the discussions during the day, I'm not so sure the Nordic-Baltic cooperation is about visions at all. Maybe that's the wrong question. Is it then about interests? To some extent, yes, there are shared interests. Is it about emotions? We like to come together and talk to each other, and something useful sometimes comes out of it. You can also talk about shared identity. In Estonia, we always like to talk about shared Nordic-Baltic identity. It's also about interdependence, something very concrete that exists. It's there, it binds us together. It concerns the economy, it concerns security, it forces us to think of how this region is doing, also in the EU framework. And we have been able to identify a lot of common features of the Nordic-Baltic group, things that bring us together, starting from the global context, the global changes, understandings of sovereignty, our threat perceptions, insecurity coming closer, our economic interdependence continuing to be strong. Then there are also very clear dividing lines, like Euro, non-Euro, NATO, non-NATO, level of welfare. I sense that all of these dividing lines are becoming a bit less relevant. That's an interesting observation. But now, please, the chairs of the sessions, would you give us your 5 minutes of concluding points? And Stephen, shall we start with you?
Yeah, this is an all-male panel. Just to balance it out a little bit. My main takeaways are, of course, before I go to the catalogue of interests and areas where I think there's room for convergence and cooperation along Nordic-Baltic lines, the general characteristics which have been explained in the opening speech, of course, by the minister, but also in the first panel, that this is not a bloc, but relies on liquid coalitions that are issue-based, interest-based, a regional grouping whose perception may be stronger in the eyes of others in order to coalesce around certain reform issues in the institutional sense of the European Union, together with other economic liberally minded countries like the Netherlands and Ireland. See the letter from the finance ministers earlier this year. But in as far as concrete areas of cooperation are concerned, I think Katarina actually gave us a very nice catalogue at the very outset, which identified convergence on transparency, which is also mentioned in of course, the blurb, IT, artificial intelligence, climate, human capital was mentioned with a specific focus on gender. And then as far as the internal market is concerned, of course, the 4 countries that were represented at the panel could be broken in two. The 2 non-Euro loyal but reluctant member states, Sweden and Denmark, and the loyal and more forward-leaning Baltic states, Estonia and Latvia, Euro members, where nevertheless on the on elements of the banking union there might be convergence. Capital flows were mentioned, but I'm sure that Kate will talk more about this. On the side of the internal market, the strengthening of the social pillar of the internal market. So. And then, of course, well, there's a security realm that was mentioned as well, but I don't want to mow the grass in front of Johannes's feet. I think that the general line that I take away from the substantive areas of convergence is that the Eurozone is and will remain the main driving force for European integration in the future, and even for those countries that have opt-outs from it, they will try and, because they economically rely so much on it, will definitely work towards strengthening or buttressing it from outside, and they can use the help of their Baltic brethren and sisters in that respect.
Thank you. So, Kate, your session focused on the economy. So what would you like
thanks
to
a
add?
lot.
And
I
what
will
was
echo.
not
Yes,
raised in the panel?
I will echo a little bit what Steve already said. Indeed, the Eurozone and the future of the economic and monetary union is one of the big issues. I think what the region as a whole needs to tackle, and there are some dividing elements, indeed, as some of the countries are not the members. Maybe it was not so relevant before the economic crisis, because then the economic and monetary union was very different compared with what it is today, that it was more about just a joint currency. But now what to see that there are so many additional policy elements built on that, like a banking union, which was mentioned also, the coordination of budgets, the coordination of economy, that of course there will be some this kind of elements where the countries who currently have the opt-out for the Eurozone need to decide in the future that would they like to join, for example, the banking union or not. From the decision-making perspective, we discussed that it's not so big issue, that of course there could be more coordination with the countries on Eurozone-related decisions or discussions. more coordination with the countries who don't belong to Eurozone, but this seemed to be not so big issue. But other is kind of big future-looking issues, I think, is of course trade. And then there is this big issue, as I understand what has been discussed throughout 2 days, is the Hanseatic League type of development. And by trade, I mainly mean trade with the third countries. We have a very challenging international environment currently what concerns trade issues, and the type of free trade agreements what the European Union has signed so far, which has also many social elements, environmental elements, etc., which have been always relevant also to the Nordic countries. Of course, is the issue of we don't know, can it be continued in the future? We will have more lighter free trade agreements, and then, of course, the region as a whole needs to adjust to that development also. And for the more forward-looking, then the issue of this Hanseatic League, what we discussed. And as I said already during the panel that one thing is the brand, which can of course be a good this kind of brand for branding the region as a whole. But of course, one could think of feel it more with the substance also. And this is what we didn't discuss so much during the panel, but to think a little more innovatively is that why not we could talk about this kind of modern Hanseatic League, because I think the things which were covered by the Hanseatic League when it existed, like trade issues, these are very much in the EU framework today. But we have plenty of issues, which is digital, data, innovation, this type of things, where you could imagine that the Nordic-Baltic region leaps ahead from the other EU countries and builds this kind of innovative new block on these issues. It relates to that also that there is a lot of room, I think, to do much more in the foreign trade together. I mean, more than the export promotion, marketing, doing more cooperation between the companies, between the governments, etc. So I think these are all this type of forward-looking issues for the region. But in general, of course, we concluded that the EU has been very beneficial mutually to all the Nordic-Baltic countries, and for Nordic countries it has meant more investment opportunities, more labor, bigger leverage in the EU. For Baltic countries, quicker conversion with the welfare standards, and also a lot of opportunities for export trade, opportunities for companies, etc. So in general, I think the picture is still very positive.
Thank you. Now we've got a little bit to the vision thing. Thank you for leading us in that direction. Modern Hanseatic League, which is the way you presented it, it's something that is not at all against or competing with what the EU is already doing, but adds something new.
Yeah, exactly. I think there were questions also that are this type of, I heard from the audience from the previous panels that are this type of joint initiative somehow against the EU unity. And I'm from the European Commission. I don't really see that this is the case, that if you do it in the EU framework and you just add in some of the issues, I think this is not a problematic issue at all, and I don't see that this could somehow divide the EU as such in general.
Okay, Johannes.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm in an interesting position. Usually, I feel more comfortable standing there asking questions than sitting with, with so bright people who I usually ask those questions from. So a strange situation from my side. As a journalist, when I went to Brussels, and I'll begin that from a bit further away because I don't have too much to say on today's debate, when I look back onto the 6 years that I've been covering issues, the EU has been rather efficient in creating new tools and, well, putting those new tools into use when tackling, for instance, the euro crisis, the financial crisis. We have a set of new tools that helped that helped us to preserve the euro, essentially. With the refugee crisis, we saw amazing political will to make a deal with Turkey and to close borders, something that was rather unimaginable to happen even a few days before the decision was taken. Now, with this new defense need that both presidents from Russia and the US have delivered to Europe, we certainly have a few ideas and few solutions on paper that are, well, in theory appealing and could work, but will they actually make sense in the real world? I mean, when these tools are needed, how long will it take to actually put them into use? I mean, these are, I think, big questions that in theory in this room it's nice to talk about deepening defense cooperation, but how will it actually work? What are the real interests of different groups when difficult decisions very much connected to sovereignty need to be taken under a new set of tools and new situations? So I think for me the question what Emmanuel Macron actually wants when he's talking about defense cooperation and his new initiative, and why are some countries more eager in following them than others? And I mean, are they just serving the French narrow purposes and aims that are in most cases not connected with Nordic-Baltic strategic goals? These are intriguing questions that I would like to ask someone like Stephen or Riina or distinguished panelists that unfortunately had to leave the stage, but which I feel I do not have the capacity to answer. So, yeah, a lot of questions need to be discussed during coffee.
I will add just 2 more keywords that we can then reflect as we leave the conference. One is pragmatism. It was mentioned many, many times during the discussions. And whenever you hear this word, it has become popular also in EU foreign policy discourse. It makes you a bit suspicious. It sounds like now we are talking about some compromises being made. We are talking about means justifying ends, or somebody not quite achieving what they want to achieve, so they just try to make the best of the unsatisfactory situation. So there is that kind of sense of pragmatism in the air, I think, not just with the Nordic-Baltic group, but often with the EU also, where you have to find compromises constantly. But a completely different keyword that was mentioned a couple of times, especially by our Danish speakers, and that is values. And sometimes maybe what is most important and closest to your heart you don't talk about so much. And hopefully this is the case with values. But we also know in the current EU political context, it is not so easy to be outspoken about values. But I think in the Nordic-Baltic region among our countries, it is still something that is very important in holding us together, and I hope we continue to understand how much it means. So this was one more final point, and now I think it is time to thank everybody. I would like to thank all the speakers who came here. We had a wonderful selection of experts and also some unusual combinations. Thank you, Johannes, for agreeing to sit on the final session. Indeed, the chairs did a great job, as I said before. Of course, I want to thank the co-organizers, the European Commission delegation to Estonia, Keit Kasemets and his colleagues. I want to thank the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, Tobias Mörschel and his colleagues. This really worked very well to organize this event together. Now the Estonian Foreign Policy Institute will continue to work on this topic and see what we can squeeze out of it, if we get to some visions or if we have to stick with pragmatism or something in between. We shall take the liberty to use and hopefully not misuse what we heard during this day. It has all been live streamed anyway, and for anyone to freely to be quoted who wishes. But we will be writing, myself together with my colleague Piret Kuusik, a report on the Nordic-Baltic region in the EU framework and looking at the topics that we were discussing today, which then will take a few months' time, I think, to complete, but we will definitely let you know once it is done. And I mentioned Piret Kuusik already. The final and the biggest thanks actually goes to Piret, who has been the real driving force and organizer, doing a lot of work on this conference and really making it possible to happen. So a big thank you to Piret and to everyone. So now it's time to wish you all a safe trip back home. Thank you for coming, and this conference is now closed.